well, it'll be a different place for everyone. I was going to say on the left-hand side for me, but welcome everyone. Welcome one and all. My name is William Kilbride. I work for a little organisation called the Digital Preservation Coalition, and it's my pleasure to welcome you here. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, depending where you are, to our session of lightning talks. I'm just going to give a moment to, as I see people joining the room, we'll maybe give them one more brief moment to do that. While that happens, let me just provide you with the usual instructions, as it were, the usual welcome. Firstly, to say, as you probably already know, please do turn your microphone and camera off if that's possible. That way we will conserve bandwidth and there won't be any noises off. Obviously, up to the point where you want to potentially ask a question or you're one of the presenters, we obviously need you then, so please don't turn them off completely. You'll know there is a chat box. Please use the chat box. You'll notice there's a Q&A box. If you have particular questions to the speakers, please use the Q&A box. That makes it neater and tidier for me as chair of our session today. And obviously, we will pick those questions out as the session moves on. I should say this is, of course, the lightning talks, and so they're relatively short papers. We're looking for something in the region of 7 minutes per paper, and also then a bit of brief Q&A at the end of every session. The other thing to note then is just the usual rules apply, and about being respectful and welcoming to each other and encouraging a lively discussion between us all. We'll all learn from each other as a consequence. Technical support matters, I'll happily refer you to our technical support colleagues here. So please use the chat box to reach out to them or potentially email them by a more traditional route. And that's everything I wanted to say by way of welcome. So it's a great pleasure then to hand over to Rebecca and Steve, Rebecca Dixon and Steve Marks, joining us from, well, I'll let you introduce COPL and I'll let you introduce the institutions, Rebecca and Steve, and over to you for the first lightning talk, File ID Tools for Curating Research Data Formats. Thank you, Rebecca.
Great, thank you, William. So as William said, I'm Rebecca Dixon. I'm the Digital Preservation Coordinator for the Council of Prairie and Pacific University Libraries. We're a consortium of 23 university libraries in Western Canada. And I'll be co-presenting today with my colleague Steve Marks here at the University of Toronto Libraries. Steve and I are both members of the Preservation Expert Group, which falls under the Portage Network and Canada's new digital research infrastructure organization, really just organizations dedicated to the shared stewardship of research data in Canada. We'll be talking to you today about a project that our Preservation Expert Group is working on with some colleagues across Canada in collaboration with Portage's Curation Coordinator. So a brief outline to start us off. I'm going to start off by talking about the rationale for this project and the goals, what we're trying to accomplish here. After that, I'll pass it off to Steve, who will tell you a bit about how we created a data set of files, how we selected tools to test for this project, what our preliminary results are looking like, and what our lessons learned are so far. So in terms of rationale, we all know that file identification is an essential part of any digital preservation workflow. Many long-term preservation decisions hinge on how well the contents of a digital archive can be characterized. They inform migration decisions, they help determine what software needs to be maintained to access and use certain files, and even what hardware may be required to store exceptional formats. To aid in this work, the preservation community, including I'm sure some people here, have developed a number of tools to perform automated identification of file formats based on the Chronome file format signature registry maintained by the UK National Archives. Archivists can run a single tool over a huge number of incoming files and determine with relatively high accuracy the format of many commonly used file types. On the other side of that, our colleagues in data curation also rely on accurate information about file formats to help them review and prepare datasets for publication. For example, the Data Curation Network's curated steps and checklist encourage checking files and identifying file formats to inform transformation actions to improve data file reuse and preservation. Some of the checks the curator performs in smaller data sets, unfortunately, do not scale well for multi-terabyte submissions, or they might not be feasible when a large collection of data sets is ingested at once. So what we were wondering, if file identification tools can accurately assess research data formats, running a tool over new data deposits would provide curators with a high-level overview of the dataset contents and could help target the review process. It may make it easier to spot check a subset of each file type and could highlight file formats that may warrant special attention. These tools could help facilitate conversations with researchers when seeking to require alternate formats in accordance with repository policies. And so, as part of this project, we're asking ourselves, how could these file identification tools be useful to the curation workflow? The Portage Network itself had varied skill levels and experience using file ID tools, and this group wasn't really struck to answer technical questions, but more to explore the utility of tools in different contexts and in different roles. We're also asking ourselves, what do curators really need out of a file ID tool? Do they need specific output formats, signatures, or MIME type info, other special features? I will say in general, we're more focused on the accuracy of these tools and other types of performance metrics we've seen reported on, things like the speed with which something will identify a file. Ultimately, this is really a group of people getting together and following the instructions to test the tools to figure out what works best for you, and the approach that's generally advocated for by the tool makers. And so the specific use case that sparked this comes from the Canadian Federated Research Data Repository, which is a curated national repository built to handle large multi-terabyte data sets. At the Federated Research Data Repository, otherwise known as FRDR, developer Mike Winter from the University of Saskatchewan has been working on a curation dashboard that integrates file identification into the curation workflow, so curators might also benefit from the use of these tools to automate some of their processes. We're seeking to uncover how well the most widely used file identification tools available today would perform on these research data formats, given the complexity and the variety of file types that may be represented in data sets, as opposed to what we often encounter when we're accessioning things like government records, personal papers, and more common office document and image formats that tend to form the bulk of archival deposits. And with that, I will pass this over to my colleague, Steve, to talk a little bit about our methodology for creating this data set.
Thanks, Rebecca. So in terms of creating the data set, we basically pulled from two sources. One is Scholars Portal Dataverse. So this is a shared research data repository that's used by a number of research institutions in Canada as a general purpose research data repository. The other is Dryad, which I think probably doesn't need any introduction here. And in pulling this sample together, we're not looking for a representative sample per se, as much as we were looking to get the largest variety of research data types possible. So basically, we had a couple of people look through the repositories and pull together identifiers for the data that we were going to use, and then our scripting wizard Rebecca put some scripts together to actually pull that data into our testing environment. In terms of the tools that we used here, it's these three, which again, if you work in this space, don't need much introduction, and we don't really have time to do it anyway. But the idea there was to give sort of a spread of whether of how different tools would work in this environment. And obviously there's pronom-based ones, and then Siegfried, which is quite popular nowadays. And we use pretty extensively in the digital preservation space. So in terms of what happened, we basically pulled down all these files and then basically ran the file identification tools on them. And some of the, we're still in the process of pulling together final results. So I don't have a ton of numbers to throw at you, but what I do have is sort of impressions and what we've been with up to this point. And if you've used these tools in digital preservation practice, the results are going to be kind of what you'd expect, right? So both the Droid, the pronom-based tools, and Siegfried really quite good at identifying common Office formats, right? PDF, Word, Excel, things like that. Where it gets a little muddier is once you get into things that are more or less just plain text but structured differently, right? And so working with Dataverse, it creates these tab files, which are essentially like tab separated value files, but they're reformatted in order to help present them through the Dataverse interface. And in our tools struggle a little bit to identify these correctly, as well as sort of the general confusion that you would see around, plain text files, which encompass not just tabular data, but also code and also XML and various types of things like that. Another thorny issue that we ran into, and I think this will be common to a lot of people, is the .dat file issue, which is that lots and lots of different types of data files use a .dat extension. And when you over rely on using file extension to identify, that can lead to a lot of false results. But also, like, many of these .dat formats are just not that well documented. So the tools definitely struggle there. That's not so much an issue, or not as much of an issue, I guess, in the curation space as it is in raw digital preservation practice, where sort of me as a practitioner, I tend to run these tools on a large swath of files and just kind of sock them away. What we're talking about here is really curation in a more active sense, and so it gives a lot more opportunity for active engagement with the files there. I'll skip ahead here, but obviously, again, we run into issues with extension and things like that. And what we found generally is that the tools are a great help to curators who are active in the process, but really nothing has occurred to obviate the need for proper documentation. And the tools are tools, and really what we found is that these tools that are brought in to work in digital preservation space do a really nice job during the process of active digital curation as well. So if you have any questions, please do add them. We're hanging out here. Thanks for your time.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Rebecca and Steve. I don't know how we do a round of applause on this platform, but we should do our very best to give you a round of applause. Let's just see, there's lots of thumbs up going on. So a very quick question. We'll get time for one from Jez Cope. Jez, British Library, I guess. Hi, Jez. So the question is, would it be useful or viable to have some sort of sprint type event to add research data signatures to Pronom? I think that's a cracking idea. I think it's been attempted before, but I'm sure it's needed again because the formats continue to change. Have you considered doing anything like that, or would that interest you?
I think so. I think Steve, and feel free to jump in here. I think that's something we've talked about as a possible outcome later once we've identified some formats that are maybe not being well identified. Yeah, trying to feed that back into something like Pronom would be great. And community type sprint, sure, sounds awesome.
Well, we've got the right community here, so we'll vote Jez Cope in charge of setting that up for us on the basis of asking the question. I'm being facetious, of course, Jez. That's a very good idea, and we should certainly follow that up. Listen, time's pressing, however, these are our lightning talks, so I hope you don't mind if we move on now. Thank you, Rebecca and Steve, and I'm going to hand very quickly over to Paul, who's going to talk to us, Paul Stokes of JISC, who's going to talk to us around Forgotten FE. So over to you, Paul. I'm not getting your audio, Paul. Paul, just to interrupt you for a moment, there's no audio.
Of the Jabra of the platform. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we've got you now. Thank you, Paul.
Good. Okay, sorry about that. Quick tip for everyone: when you change sessions, it defaults to a different microphone. Anyway, so I'm Paul Stokes. I work for JISC. We're the UK not-for-profit membership organisation providing digital products and services to the HEFE and skills sector in the UK. I've been working with research data, and in particular preservation of research data, for some time. And I lead on preservation for what used to be called the Research Data Shared Service, RDSS, then became JISC Open Research Hub, and more recently simply JISC's Repository and Preservation Service. And it appears that I'm the go-to person for preservation in JISC, because when a colleague started talking to an FE college recently about their electronic records management, I was roped in. My initial thought was this conversation would be about making the business case for a procurement or discussing the merits of various preservation systems and maybe even a demo. I was wrong. What I found was this, a major can of worms. The FE data landscape is hard and painful in the extreme. Why? Well, let me explain. A bit of background, where to begin? Historically, FE systems have evolved organically as statutory requirements have been added, so systems have been procured to provide immediate, unintegrated, short-term solutions, the so-called point solutions. This on its own is bad enough, but it's been exacerbated through the recent flurry of mergers and acquisitions. And many system suppliers appear to not give much thought, if any, to the possibility of 2 or more student information management systems from different institutions being merged. Broadly speaking, the data stored by an institution can be divided into 2 areas: the ordinary file server style storage stuff using widely understood common current file formats, the information stored in profiles, office documents, shared document space, and so on, and data contained in proprietary standalone systems designed to perform a limited range of functions like student monitoring, student information systems, and so on. So what's driving the requirements to keep stuff? Well, it's statutory. Quite apart from the normal HR information that needs to be stored, a significant portion of the FE student population are minors or vulnerable. This not only increases the information that must be retained after they leave, safeguard information alongside the normal student information and so on, but the retention periods are also increased. And in some cases, the sensitive nature of that data is also exacerbated. There's the financial driver. Like any corporate body, FE institutions need to retain financial data relating to their staff income and so on. But unlike many other institutions, however, they're subject to a future audit and potentially clawback with a requirement to prove such things such as attendance, attainment, and so on. And then there's the educational portfolios. Students and academic qualification accreditation bodies need to be able to access evidence of attainment well after a student has left the institution, potentially for decades after. And those data retention requirements, and there are many requirements in play, some are relatively long-term, and many external agencies mandate those periods. And another pain point for FE is the retention policies, where they exist, are not always widely known or understood, even by the staff who handle the data regularly. At best, this leads to situations where data that should be destroyed is kept just in case. And at worst, it leads to situations where data is deleted prematurely. And the situation is not helped by the intermittent nature of some of the review processes implemented by external bodies. There can be periods of 5 years, 10 years or more between reviews. And there have been instances where staff have gone to access files for a new review only to find that they've been deleted because they haven't been touched in 15 years. It's also worth noting that some of these externally imposed data retention requirements are not really within the spirit or even the letter of data protection. Everything kept just in case forever is not really a valid reason for keeping data. Another problem: multiple situations, multiple locations, multiple systems. Most colleges will have multiple systems at multiple sites, generating, storing, and using data. Some of these are end of life, some are obsolete, many use proprietary formats. Of particular concern are systems that are no longer supported and where the vendor has disappeared. What about interconnection? Because of the way the infrastructures and requirements have evolved, on the most part, standalone quick fixes, there's very little consideration that's been given to connecting services to form coherent systems. As a result, there can be many single sources of truth, which at best leads to inconsistencies between data held in different systems, and at worst leads to the necessity of data rekeying and errors. Moving data between systems tends to involve manual export and import. That's always assuming that data import and export are possible, and these processes almost inevitably allow errors to creep in. I mentioned data export and archiving and APIs. Data stored in databases is difficult to preserve at the best of times. An example, a college is safeguarding data. It appears that there's no way of exporting this data. This is a real-life example. It potentially needs to be kept for a decade or more and is at risk in its current format. Their current version is running on obsolete hardware and uses an obsolete operating system. The only solution is to either cut and paste the data into a Word document, or to pay to build a version in the cloud and maintain it for a decade, just so they can access the old archived data. Obviously not a very good financial solution. The lack of archiving, in this context, taking old records offline from the day-to-day system and placing them in a suitable format for storage preservation, puts a significant strain on system resources. Another example, a real-life example, a college that's been using a particular system for 20 years. It currently has 20 years worth of data in a live system. And quite apart from the performance hit that will be experienced when trying to search or process such an enormous amount of data, when, and not if, a system failure occurs, the magnitude of the data loss will be that much greater. Mergers and acquisitions. This is a particular problem in the FE sector. When two or more colleges merge their data systems, they need to be merged into a single coherent system. Now, even when the systems are the same across the two or more institutions involved, this can be a significant problem. Merged data set is generally not a standard function in data sets. But when the systems are different, it can be almost impossible. Matching data can be a particular problem. Even if there's an API or an export function, the same information or data may exist in different fields or in different ways. So, for instance, name, first name equals to last name. Often the only solution is a combination of keeping the old system running to allow for data searching and retrieval, along with rekeying or crucial information into the new system. Bear in mind, this is not a single one-off, never to be repeated problem, because mergers have been known to happen sequentially. And due to the way the systems have evolved, there are pockets of data in many different local and cloud-based infrastructures, and many of these files have been kept for a long time. In some cases, so long that the origin is lost in the mist of time. And again, the default housekeeping is to keep the stuff just in case. And finally, the storage requirements. Storage requirements are exponentially increasing. A few years ago, a student record consisted of about 2 megs data, name, address, photo, achievements, and so on, mostly born digital. These days, each record is now more than an order of magnitude larger, if not much more. Not only have the number of students increased, but the size of the standard information they keep has been increased. The photograph, for instance, is high res. The portfolio of assessed work is often not born digital and scanned in, and it's enormous. It must be kept in case of future audit in future years. So this leads me to the question of, so what happens now? Well, you tell me. This has been an awareness-raising exercise. There are many potential pathways forward. System standards and certification, data interchange APIs, communities of practice, engendering more understanding of the particular problems of FE, to name but a few. So if you're an FE practitioner and/or have particular insights into the world of FE pain, then please see me after school. Apologies for talking so fast. It's the way I talk, but that's me.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Paul. Listen, I think I've got a question for you, but I'm going to hold it off until the end, if that's okay, because I think it's a question that could be shared between yourself potentially and Barbara, who's up next. So, with time pressing on, I wonder if Barbara, I can put you straight into the frame. Barbara Searman, long-time supporter of digital preservation initiatives around the world and the KB in particular. Barbara, over to you.
Yeah. Can you see my screen?
Coming. Oh, no, that's me. Not yet, Barbara.
No, not yet.
Sorry.
Yeah, unfortunately, I can turn off your screen sharing if you have it turned on, but I can't turn it on for you.
Please allow access. Yes, I allow access. Share desktop. You see it now?
Yeah.
Got it. Yes. Got
So
it.
we're seeing the whole desktop. You might want to just choose the option to share the application instead, because at the moment the Juno window is covering the slides.
No, I can only see. They say stop sharing. But
Yeah, so stop sharing, and when you do it again, instead of saying share screen, there's an option to
Share.
just share a window, an application.
A window, yes, I see.
Yeah.
I did try it yesterday, but
Yeah,
this should be okay. Is it?
that's brilliant. That's exactly it. Great.
Okay, thank you. Well, sorry for the. I will run through my through my presentation. That's why I wrote it down, because otherwise I might extend the amount of time. It's about reuse, the ultimate test for sustainability, and I do this together with Ingrid Dillo from DANS, and I'm Barbara Sierman. I'm working for myself in the digitalpreservation.nl consultancy. In this lightning talk, we want to draw your attention to an often overlooked element between open research data and the preservation infrastructure, namely the dissatisfied or dissatisfied user. Open research and open data are a hot topic. In order to achieve the overall goal of open science, we need different components: transparent scientific practices, scientific integrity, and open access publishing. And another fundamental component of open science is data sharing and reuse. To enable reuse of data and digital objects, these need to meet a certain standard with respect to the scientific quality, the fitness for purpose, technical quality, and ease of access. In order to keep the data reusable over time, data curation and preservation is needed. To improve open science, an infrastructure to tackle various issues was developed. With the publication of the FAIR principles, a high-level framework was created to improve the findability, accessibility, interoperability, and reuse of digital objects. The FAIR data principles are widely accepted, not only in the research domain, but also, for example, starting to be popular in the digital heritage domain, from which I come from. The FAIR principles can be seen as a guide to improve the management of research data, as well as a first step to prepare digital data for the longer term. By phrasing and implementing requirements to improve the usability of digital data, these data sets are better prepared to be saved for the long term. Practical guidelines were developed to implement the principles. In the Research Data Alliance, the FAIR data maturity model was created. This model phrased a set of criteria for each ingredient in the FAIR principles to support the testing of the maturity level of a dataset. And based on these criteria, with the European project FAIR's FAIR created an automated data assessment tool called Fuji. Yes, sorry for this. This tool is designed for machine interaction and can be used by repositories. There's also a web-based graphical user interface, so apart from the machine interaction, that allows for FAIR data assessment tests with the Fuji tool in a human-friendly manner. And the same project, the FAIR's FAIR project, in addition to this tool, they created the FAIR Aware tool to help researchers to make their datasets FAIR before uploading them to a repository. FAIR data, however, is only valid at a certain moment in time. In order to stay FAIR, repositories where data are deposited need to undertake actions continuously until the data are disposed of. This is where the profession of digital preservation plays an important role, but only if the FAIR principles are well implemented. The Open Archival Information System, the OAIS, already in 2005 defined starting points to keep information accessible over time. And these points are translated into requirements and assessment criteria like the Core Trust Seal and the ISO 16363. And a summary of these requirements and counterpart to the FAIR principles are the trust principles: transparency, responsibility, user focus, sustainability, and technology, in that order of priority. So with these two mechanisms, FAIR and trust, it seems that both the data and the organizations taking care of curating and preserving these data are covered. But one party is missing: the users. An important topic for long-term preservation is the concept of designated community in the OAIS model. The idea behind the concept is that the repository will pay attention to the users of the data and will take appropriate measures to serve the user in understanding the data. In a discussion about reuse of digital data, this concept is hardly discussed. No wonder, as the concept is vague and only easy to understand if you have a very clear view of the people or machines that will reuse your data. In practice, that will often not be the case. Open science will invite new users to reuse the data, currently out of scope for the repositories that are taking care of the data. Digital preservation also needs to pay attention not only to the current users, but to the future users. It's, after all, long-term preservation, and the designated community might change over the years. This new user and the related expectations might even be less known than the current, already unknown user and their knowledge base. How can we get to grips with this? Open science repositories and digital preservationists can collaborate in thinking about how to serve the user now and in the future, but based on the current experiences. In digital preservation, this is part of Preservation Watch. By monitoring the current situation with expected and unexpected users, we can learn how to improve current approaches and prepare for the future. In other words, if we can serve our current users, both the known and the unknown ones, we can learn about the needs of the future users, at least partly. According to the State of Open Data report, due to the COVID pandemic, an increase in reuse of data is expected in and between domains. It means that new users will need to familiarize themselves with digital data from another domain. The actual reuse can be counted, of course, and there are several methods to do so, like the Counter Code of Practice for Research Data Usage Matches. And recently, RDA published a set of recommendations for public review to measure the reuse of data. But these applications only bring you figures. What's not measured is the satisfaction of the reuser of the data. A satisfied user is the ultimate goal of digital preservation. We preserve to give access to the user. The satisfaction of the user with the data is the ultimate test of sustainability. It will inform us whether all the effort done in digital preservation was worthwhile. It's how repositories can account for their expenses. And flaws in reuse will inform us how to improve the preservation process. It's important to show success stories in the reuse of datasets, like, for example, OpenAIRE is doing. But even more important is it to record when reuse of data went wrong and why, especially if the users come from another domain than the repository was focused on. The actual state of reuse with the positive and negative outcomes can be input for the repositories to steer their digital preservation processes, to give input to the preservation community of issues that are to be expected in the near future. This talk is an invitation to collaboratively collect practical information about successful and unsuccessful reuse of digital data. A methodological evaluation of the current practices will help to derive well-founded insights that can lead to a validation and improvement of the current preservation infrastructure, to show that sustainable repositories will lead to satisfied users now and in the future. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Barbara. Again, I think we should get Barbara a round of applause, and we forgot to give Paul a round of applause, which is a great shame. So thank you very much, Barbara. Listen, we're really over time. I'm sorry to say we're 5 minutes past the hour. I should say, though, that our next appointment is with lunch, and lunch isn't being served. There's not a queue forming somewhere. So perhaps we could just take a brief moment of further questions and discussions. And I'm particularly just very quickly draw attention to a question from Jessica. Is the Fuji tool suitable to assess the fairness of individual data sets? Well, Ingrid has answered that for us, I think. So I think we can say that question is answered, but I just thought maybe I could pause for a moment on that question. Is there anything to add to that? Well, I'm guessing, oh, here comes Ingrid.
Yes.
We can hear you.
Okay, great. So maybe just to add quickly, this is a tool that is already available, but we would like to get any feedback that we can get from people. It's an automated ingest tool, so it can be used by repositories and maybe at other points in the research data lifecycle. So it's an automated ingest tool, but there is also a humanly friendly interface available at the moment, and I pasted the link to that interface in the chat. So anybody who has a data set with a persistent identifier can try it out and see for themselves. And go to the website of the FAIR's FAIR project if you're interested and want to know more.
This is Jessica. I asked a question. Can I just say, I just tried it out and it works perfectly.
Well, that's good to hear.
I
glad.
just put in a DOI for one of my own presentations. Works really great.
Thanks.
You are a live test as well as a live demo, all at the same time. The kind of feedback you want. Thank you very much for that, Ingrid, and even more so, Jessica, for your question and for showing that it works. So I wonder if I could move on just with a kind of observation of my own, if you'll forgive me, which is really to try and bring the three presentations together in some form. It occurs to me that especially our first two presentations this morning caused us to consider the extent to which research data management and related sectors need to work together, right? So there's a question about research data characterization, which Rebecca and Steve very clearly articulate. There's also a question for Paul. In a way, Paul's talking about the research data infrastructure at JISC. How do we fit that for purpose around a different use case, which is FE, which is the most obvious next, community along. I mean, for crying out loud, it's in almost the same institutions. And Barbara, you're talking about FAIR, a slightly different perspective, I guess, but the reuse potential being about a correspondence not just within research data, but within the broader kind of there's more to world than access question, which we've talked about before. So I wonder if I could get maybe just the three of you to reflect briefly on that thought of how do we bring these different sectors together, and what opportunities would arise if we could do it. And I don't know who wants to go first. Maybe I'll leave you to decide who goes first. Who blinks?
I think Paul is talking, but we don't hear him. Too many microphones, Paul.
While Paul's troubleshooting, I guess I would say that I think that some of this is going to arise naturally, and I think what has probably been highlighted in these presentations is that there are external pressures that are sort of driving these various use cases to converge right now. And so I think, in a sense, all that's necessary is for people to be willing to work together and to recognize that there are these common threads that have been maybe proceeding in parallel for a while now, but that can now be weaved in together.
Yeah.
Is working.
Is Paul talking or not?
Yeah, we've got you now.
Hey, good stuff. Sorry, Bob, I interrupted you.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, basically, we have systems in place, we have infrastructures in place that are, in my case, particularly relating to research data. We still don't know enough about the other use cases. So for me, the first stage is to get everyone in a room together and start talking about it. And not just the users and providers of the data, not just the JISCs as well, but also the systems vendors as well, because they're the ones who aren't talking to each other and having standards in place. And until such time as there are standards and commonality across systems and a main means of interconnecting, then the situation will continue.
Barbara, can I bring you in for one last thought or
Well,
observation from your experience?
Yes, I'm very much in favor of collaboration between organizations and between especially the research data and the preservation community, I think. But I have learned that collaboration needs to be organized. so either by Research Data Alliance or DCC or DPC or whatever, someone need to take the initiative, and then the others will join, I think. So this is a lightning talk. So you can put things in the outside world, and hopefully people will join you some way, so we can organize something.
Listen, thank you very much, all. We're well past our scheduled time, and I realise if I go any further, I'm going to get an action from this meeting. So thank you all very much. Listen, if participants still there, listen, let's give one more round of applause. Special call out to Rebecca and Steve for getting up at all hours in the morning to join us today. Very much appreciated.
Thank you.
And we shall continue the conversation, so there'll be more chance to discuss these matters over lunch. Indeed, over the coffee breaks and at the unconference tomorrow. So thank you all so much for your time. Been a great session, and we'll follow this up for sure. Bye for now.
Thank you. Bye-bye.